I'm Alice.
And I'm Brett.
And this is The Prosecutor's Legal Briefs. Now, a lot of you may be thinking, well, gosh darn it, this Dan Doolin messed up. If he didn't misfile this tip, we'd know sooner. But he didn't misfile the tip, despite what people have said online. It was Dispatch who got the name wrong somehow. And Richard Allen was given the name Richard Allen Whiteman. And he noted, actually, I think it was Doolin who noted on the document, hey, you sent me out to follow up on this tip. The tip is for the wrong person. The name is wrong. So Doolin actually notes, hey, we need follow up on this. And this just kind of doesn't ever get fixed. And Doolin looked up Allen after he became a suspect, and he noticed that Allen had changed his height from 5'4" to 5'6", so a little taller, which is just weird. And on cross-examination, the defense suggests that anyone could have changed his height, and maybe it wasn't Richard Allen who had changed his height. But on redirect, this is why you have the back and forth, because if you open the door on cross-examination, the prosecution gets to come back and hear the full story. And so Doolin gets the opportunity to explain why he actually knows it was Allen who changed the height. He said he was able to see the credit card used, the email address, and the IP address, all of which connected back to Richard Allen as the person who changed the height. So it was Richard Allen who changed it. It wasn't law enforcement. It wasn't some mistake by someone else. Richard Allen was the one who changed his height after the fact.
And you may be wondering yourself, why would he do that? Look, put yourself in the perspective. Let's assume for a second he's guilty. Assume he did it. Put yourself in his shoes. You don't know what people know. You don't know what people saw. You don't know who saw you. You don't know how they described you, right? Maybe you assume they described you accurately. They described you as a short little fellow, 5'4", right? And so you're thinking, if someone saw me and they're saying 5'4", if I change my height to 5'6", maybe if the police are just looking through the records, they'll say, well, it's not this guy, he's too tall, right? Now, maybe he just, for reasons that are unclear, decided to change his height, and this is on his fishing license, I think. He just decided to change his height and add 2 inches. Maybe, I mean, that's possible, but it seems like a strange thing to do, right? Like, it doesn't really make sense. The only circumstance in which it makes sense is if you think someone described Bridge Guy as 5'2" to 5'4", for instance, and you're like, well, if I put 5'6", then they'll rule me out as a suspect.
It's just closer to the average height, because I think the average height for a man is, 5'8", 5'7", 5'8". So maybe he's like, no one's going to believe I'm 5'8". But if 5'6" is, closer to the median and gets me out of the, bell curve of, oh, I'm a really short guy.
So the next witness we have, we're calling sort of investigators up and down to the stand. Personally, hate this. We always try and avoid having to do this, and you can work with the defense attorneys sometimes to avoid having to call witnesses back and forth, but sometimes it's absolutely necessary because you're just telling different parts of the story. So we've got a witness back who's another one of the investigators who I think had testified before, who testified about looking for a 2016 Ford Focus. He's looking through video from that day, and in the video at 1:27 p.m., he sees, heading towards the trails, a 2016 Ford Focus, or a car that looks like a Ford Focus. And it fits Allen's initial story, saying that he was at the trails at 1:30. So if the car is heading towards the trails at 1:27, it's parking at the CPS building, then the person is walking. But how do we know that it's Allen's Ford Focus? Pretty common vehicle. Well, the investigator goes to the CVS where he knows Allen works, and he finds Allen's car, and he takes a bunch of pictures. He's looking for unique features. I actually had this recently where we were trying to figure out who did something based on the vehicle, and we had pictures of the car. And so bumper stickers and a door that was the color was slightly different from the rest of the car is what we used. So that's what he's looking for. And he notices that Allen's car has specialty rims, and these rims have spokes. It's not a solid metal. They have spokes, and so you can see light shining through the rims. And on the Ford Focus in the traffic video, you can see light shining through the rims just like Richard Allen's car.
That's pretty good.
Yeah.
I mean, here we have Richard Allen's own words, independent testimony of people essentially saying they see Bridge Guy. He puts himself as Bridge Guy, and then we even have his car there, same car that he's driving now. So once Kathy Shank figures out this misfiled tip from 2017, the investigators go talk to Richard Allen on October 13th, 2022, and they ask him his story. He says that back on that day in February of 2017, he had the day off while his wife was at work. And he said that he went to his mother's house in Peru, Indiana, which, just side note, by the way, this is the same town that Keegan Kline, you may remember him from previously in this investigation or case, lives. But Keegan Kline is currently not part of this case. So run with it what you will, but that's just an interesting side note. He visits his mom. He goes home, and he grabs his blue Carhartt jacket. Again, what we see Bridge Guy wearing. And he says that he goes to the trails, and he passes 3 girls. Again, we've heard from 2 of them already in trial. And he says that while he's walking past them and on the trail, he's on his phone looking at a stock ticker. And he says that he went on one of the platforms on the bridge, which is consistent again with one of the witnesses who spotted Bridge Guy on a platform out by the bridge. Betsy Blair, remember? When she said that she saw him, he looked like he was waiting for someone and that she wasn't supposed to be there, so she turned around. Now, though, he says that he was at the trails from 12 to 1:30. Before the murders, obviously. This is obviously wrong based on the video of the Ford Focus driving towards the trails right before 1:30, and also the testimony of the 3 girls that he saw that day, and as well as Betsy Blair's testimony of seeing him on the platform. So this suggests that he might have taken the scenic route, which is all probably true since that's where the camera was that captured his car. So what we see basically 5 years later is still a pretty consistent story from him of what he did and who he passed and who he saw and where he was. But more has come out about the actual crime scene, and he now changes his story to a couple hours earlier.
Yeah. Sorry. I was just thinking about. So at this point, he's showing a picture of Bridge Guy, and this is Alan has shown a picture of Bridge Guy. He's shown a picture of Bridge Guy, and he says that if that was a picture taken with the girl's phone, then there's no way it can be him. Which I think's a little interesting way to phrase it.
Kind of an interesting. That's exactly what I thought.
Yeah.
What an interesting way to say it, as opposed to, that's not me.
Yeah, and what it tells you is it goes back to the fact he's described himself as a Bridge Guy. Like, he's not saying, I wasn't wearing that jacket. Man, that dude's way too short or way too tall. Or that wouldn't wear a hat like that. Man, I don't have jeans like that. What are you talking about? That's not me. Right?
I would never walk that close to the edge.
Yeah, it's like...
Anything, right?
Yeah. Oh, well, sure. That looks exactly like me.
Who cares where that came from? Because what if that was a trail cam? You know, like, what if it was the exact same video and it was a trail cam versus if it was on the girl's phone? If it's on the girl's phone, then it's not you. But if it's trail cam, it might be you.
And what's important here is he's admitting that, yeah, that person looks just like me. Sure. But I didn't do this, so I couldn't be on the girl's phone. I mean, that's essentially what he's saying, right? I mean, that's how I took it, at least. And I don't know, maybe you don't take it that way, but whatever. On cross-examination, this is when the defense pulls the moment that every defense attorney will do in every trial, at least once in every trial. The defense attorney will say, "You lied to this jury." And they'll point to the jury, "These 12 good men and women, you lied to them when you said this." They do that every time, right? So, like, big moment in the trial. It was always going to happen. And basically, the position is, when you said that Richard Allen took the scenic route, which is would be necessary for him to be called on camera. That was the lie. You said Richard Allen took that route. He could have taken the city route, and you're lying when you said he did that. This is followed up by like a lengthy sort of look through the transcript where the guy's looking at the transcript where he said that. He eventually finds the part of the transcript that sort of supports what he's saying. But the thing about it was, while the defense wants to make it black and white, it really seems like the transcript backs up the notion that Allen suggested it was possible he took the scenic route. He might have driven the city route. He might have driven the country route. We know we have video matching his car on the scenic route, so we can be pretty sure that's what he did. It's not as if the witness said, Richard Allen told me he took the scenic route. By God, that's what he said, and anything else is not true. He didn't say that. He is interpreting what Richard Allen said one way. The defense obviously wants it another way. The defense tries to present it to the jury as a lie, which makes sense because then it undermines the testimony of the witness. Totally get that, but seems like maybe not as much of a gotcha moment as the defense would have liked.
By the way, this is another example of trial being a lot more boring than like A Few Good Men or a movie. It was reported that this was such a long pause while the witness looked over the transcript to find the part that supported, their interpretation of it. And that's the thing we always tell our witnesses. If someone's trying to say you lied or you gotcha, you take all the time you need to review whatever document they put before you, because it's probably a different interpretation of similar words. And that's exactly what this was. I think it took, several dozen pages of him to read it. And people get nervous on the stand. And that's kind of what the defense or whoever's asking that question is banking on, that they make this big dramatic statement and you're kind of too nervous to kind of figure out your answer. So next is Tony Liggett, who is now the sheriff. And he testifies about the story of Kathy Shank finding that tip 5 years later. And when he sees the bit about seeing the three girls in Richard Allen's statement, he immediately is intrigued because obviously at this point they've already talked to those three girls. And they also, during his testimony, they also show a stabilized video, which enables you to see Bridge Guy, because I think what happened was you see Bridge Guy kind of in passing, but there's like a lot of movement because I think Libby was trying probably to be discreet in filming Bridge Guy. But this video is kind of stabilized so you can see the image of Bridge Guy walking. And he talked about the search of Allen's house on October 13th, 2022. He says that at that search, they found a .40 caliber Sig Sauer, and they also found a keepsake box that had a single unspent round with a picture of his mom. And they also found a blue Carhartt jacket that matches Bridge Guy's. On cross-examination, the defense suggests that maybe Liggett made the arrest to further his election. We talked about that earlier. This is where I said that I thought they were trying to throw in these conspiracies and whatnot. This one really didn't hold any water because Liggett was already endorsed at this point. There was no indication that he was in like a losing battle, and by making arrest, he somehow secured his position as sheriff. So that was what I was referring to at the beginning of the episode of trying to insert conspiracies where they don't exist. Now, let's see. Okay. So the defense also brought up the fact that there was a leak of crime scene photos. I thought that was an interesting tactic for them because obviously if you've been following this case, you know that there was a leak of crime scene photos that was under protective order that was due to the defense's
jury doesn't know that though.
Negligence. What?
Jury doesn't
the
know
jury
that.
doesn't know this. The jury doesn't know this, but sounds like opening a door to figuring that out. But anyways, they bring this up because again, I think what they're trying to show is sloppy police work, whatever it is. 5 years later, you misfile things, you get people's names wrong, as much as poking the hole, which is all fair game, by the way, because this tactic works. We've seen it work before, and you want to insert doubt into, law enforcement's ability to process such a complex scene. But the defense also brought up the fact that the defense also asked, wasn't the bullet the only reason you arrested Allen? Okay, the way this question is asked, or the way it's been reported that it's asked, whichever way you ask it, the fact that he asked this question I thought was very, very stupid. And here's why. We personally know, and he does too. The defense also knows this too, from the search warrant, that there is a lot more connecting Richard Allen than just the bullet, right? And so the fact that you ask that question, you open the door for the lead sheriff, the investigator who knows everything about this case, to be able to lay out piece by piece, domino by domino, why Richard Allen is the guy. You usually don't get to do that. We've talked about this before. The reason the closing and the opening statements are so important is that you hear all the evidence piecemeal through each individual witness. And it's sometimes hard in a long trial for the jury to put it all together in their minds, which is why closing arguments are so important, because you are telling the story for the first time with all these different witnesses in one package for the jury. The jury on week 2, a couple days into witness testimony, basically gets to hear the prosecution's entire evidentiary case against Richard Allen, and they were only able to do so because of the defense's question opening it up. It was almost like it was meant to be a throwaway question. Like, the answer is going to be no. And so sometimes you do get a little bit lazy, and it's almost like a scoff question. That is a misstep. And I thought this was a really big misstep for the defense to allow Liggett to say, let me tell you exactly what the evidentiary case is against Allen. Now, the defense attorney, I think this was defense attorney Rosie, also noted that cell phones solve crimes, and nothing on Richard Allen's cell phone ties him to the murder. And Liggett again notes kind of a flaw in the defense's theory here. Yes, cell phones can solve crimes. We've also talked about how nowadays we are just smarter about cell phones, and a lot of people turn their cell phones off or don't carry their cell phones with them because they know they can be tracked when they commit a crime. But Liggett says, what's interesting? Because I know this case very well. Richard Allen's alibi was that he was looking on the stock ticker on the trail, but we have no evidence of him using his cell phone that day. So not only do we not have his 24th cell phone that was used during this time, we have the cell phone data from the towers in this area that would have captured his phone if it were being used. And in fact, we don't have him there. And this is new information for us. We kind of thought this was the case because there had not been an arrest for so long. I think if maybe he was caught up in a cell phone dump, for example, cell tower dump, he may have been on a list of people to investigate. And I think we even said this back several years ago, is we don't think there's cell phone data on him, that he's not captured in any of these like geofence warrants because he's not on them. But he himself says, no, I was on my phone on a stock ticker.
So after this, we have State Trooper Dave Vito. He involved in the search, and he is introducing pictures from the search. Lots of knives, lots of box cutters, dozen phones, bunch of knives in the master bedroom. Weird place to keep knives, gotta say. Dude loves knives. I mean, whatever you want to say about Richard Allen, he loves knives. There's pictures of the Carhartt jacket, a picture of the lone .40 caliber round that Alice mentioned in the keepsake box. I have a theory about that I'll mention later. There's a photo album of the Monon High Bridge and trails. And in fact, there are Allen family photos on the trails going back to 2008. So this was a place that seems like it meant something. It was special to Richard Allen.
Or just knives. We'll talk about that some other time. I know there's a lot to talk about, but we've been going long because we're trying to recap a whole week of witness testimony here. Okay, next, Jerry Holman testified about the search. He did a walkthrough taking pictures of the the search of Richard Allen's home in October of 2022. He does a walkthrough of the home, and he takes pictures of the property to document it before the search, which is what you do, and then you obviously have a court order where you can seize certain items. And while he's doing this ahead of time, he is talking to Richard Allen, and he assures him, don't worry, we'll be careful, and we'll try not to damage anything. He's like giving him forms, basically saying, but if we do damage anything, you can file a report here. And he testifies that Richard Allen says, quote, "It doesn't matter, it's over." Subsequently, Allen asked if his wife was detained, because this does happen during a search. Sometimes you can't just have people walking around during a search, so you may detain anyone who's found on the property. But his wife actually wasn't detained. She had just left. And Holman, like in a very friendly way, says actually she left and that he could drive Richard Allen to his wife. And again, Allen said it doesn't matter. It's over. If you follow the news, I think this was a big headline, like what this means. I think it could mean a lot of things. Obviously, it doesn't sound great if your property is being searched for a double homicide for you to say it's over. The first thing most people's minds jump to is, oh, he's confessing. It could also just be that they live in a small town and not every day your house gets searched by law enforcement. And if it's getting searched, then people in town are going to talk. So I think it's too early to jump to whatever, but obviously you can see that this is not a great thing for him to say. What I think is going to be more powerful are his 60 plus confessions about exactly how he killed the girls. So don't get too hung up on trying to draw connections with this particular statement. He said a lot of things so far that are not great for him. Put this in the bucket of Richard Allen's words that don't help him.
Yeah, there are going to be more powerful things than this. This is one of those examples of a statement, which, as Alice said, there are multiple ways to interpret it. When you put it with all the other evidence, the interpretation, I think, is not great for Richard Allen. I think if this were all you had, obviously you would not have a conviction. You wouldn't have enough. But when you put this with the other evidence, you begin to wonder, what exactly is he saying? Now, in cross-examination, he's asked, hey, you're saying he said this really incriminating thing. Why didn't you record this conversation? And Holman says, look, man, I was just giving him some paperwork at the time. This wasn't a interrogation. And what's interesting about Richard Allen, and we're going to see this in this next bit, when Richard Allen is being interrogated, he's like rock solid. I didn't do this. You guys are full of it. I'm completely innocent. Like, that's the way he is. When he's not being interrogated, he's like saying all sorts of incriminating stuff. So this is like he's not under hot lights. He's not being interrogated, and he's throwing out incriminating things. All of his confessions, his quote unquote confessions, none of them came in any sort of interrogation situation. And it's just fascinating that seems to be his motif when he like goes in and he's ready. He stands strong. When it's not that kind of situation, he's saying all sorts of stuff. So Holman's like, look, this just wasn't that kind of thing. There was no reason for me to record it. And, the defense suggested what Alice did. Maybe he's just upset that, like, everybody in the world sees him. There's a search warrant being executed, and they're going to assume this is about Delphi. And maybe that's true. So after this, Melissa Oberg, who is formerly of the ISP, she testifies about forensic firearms. That's obviously important. She is the witness who determined that the cartridge found at the scene, cycled through the firearm belonging to Richard Allen. She is an expert's expert. She's testified 112 times in court. She's done this a lot. Murder Sheet described her as unflappable. She says, the cartridge obviously wasn't fired. It was cycled through the gun. This is tool mark examination. You're looking for sort of metal-on-metal contact and the pattern that it leaves on the bullet. So it's a long direct and a long cross. She basically was on the stand for the entire day. She walks through the whole process of this. The manufacture of the weapon, how the bullet cycles through, how we do this multi-level assessment. She notes there are a few things that are interesting about this. And I'll just say, if anyone tells you that forensics and firearms is just completely useless, either they don't know what they're talking about or they have an agenda. We have a prior legal briefs with an ATF agent who was actually the head of the NIBIN program. I will tell you this, we are solving cases every day with firearms analysis, with tool mark analysis on bullets. And there's no question that you can do this. This is forensics evidence like anything else. It can be done well. It can be done poorly. There have been critical studies of this science, and the people who are involved in this have responded, I think, appropriately and have bulked up their science and have supported it even better than what it was before. So if you want to criticize this particular analysis, that's fine. Anyone who tells you that this analysis is bunk, that this is like, bite mark analysis, that is silly. I mean, this is much closer to, frankly, fingerprints, which some people attack as well. Is there some subjectivity to it? Of course, because you have a human being who's looking at this in addition to the computers and everything else. And I will note, when we talk to the ATF agent about the NIBIN system, which is done a lot through AI, does that. One of the main ways, one of the three main marks they look at is the ejector mark, which is what you have here. So go through this process. She talks about the other interesting thing. If you think, well, she would say whatever gun they wanted matched the bullet. The problem for you there, she excluded some guns. So there was a Glock that she was asked to compare. She excluded that. She also tested some weapons that came out of the water. She had to dry them out first. This is from an August 2022 search of the Wabash River. I think we now know this is related to Keegan Kline. The Keegan Kline said his dad did this, and he threw the weapons into the Wabash River. Now imagine for a second that you're the ISP and you're really desperate to solve this case, and you have a known pedophile, a guy you're about to send away for life, who's saying, it was my dad, and he's telling you the weapon's in the river, and you get a weapon out of the river. If you were going to frame somebody, that's your framing moment. That's the moment where you tell the expert, you need to match this bullet to this gun because it's clearly this guy, right? Not the random CVS guy. That's the guy you want to do it with. And yet, when she compares those weapons, she excludes them. But when she compares the bullet to Richard Allen's gun, there is a match. And after she made that match, it had to be confirmed by another person who also took a look at the weapon and confirmed that indeed it did match.
So, of course, this is a witness the defense needs to push back on, and they do so with vigor. I think this witness was on the stand, I think, all day, and much of it was from cross-examination. And they focused heavily on what sufficient agreement meant between the marks on the bullet and the gun. In other words, just how sure can we be? And this cross went on for some time, but apparently Oberg didn't crack. I mean, if she's testified 112 times before, she's like the expert of experts, right? She's done this a lot, and she probably gets attacked for ballistic tool markings all the time. She discussed the distinction between a fired round and unspent round. Again, we're not going to go into detail a bit here, but that NIBIN expert that we did illegal briefs on does a beautiful job explaining just how these marks are made and how you compare them for that sufficient agreement. But they tried to say that there were studies undermining ballistics, and I think the defense kind of kept misinterpreting or maybe overstating the case of just how much ballistics was undermined by these studies, and it kept drawing objections from the prosecution. I think at some point the judge was a little bit fed up with perhaps the mischaracterization and asked the defense to continue with questions without mischaracterizing the studies. So you could go read those studies for yourself, but I think Oberg came off very committed to her reading of the tool markings here, and she wasn't the only one. There was agreement by another expert that the marks matched here. Again, this is not the only piece of evidence. It's a big one because you really got to explain away why your gun just had a bullet fall out of its chamber between two murdered girls. So it is a big one, but it's not the only thing. I'll say Oberg seems to have held up well, even in cross-examination.
So then we have Jerry Holman, who testified, and I promise you, we're nearing the end because this was on Saturday. And he was one of the most important investigators. We've heard about him a lot. And he talks about the second interview with Richard Allen on October 26th, 2022, which, as we record, was yesterday, 2 years ago yesterday, which led to Allen's arrest. Holman, he is trained in the various interrogation techniques. He talked about building rapport. He talked about how you can lie, which you obviously can do. It always amazes me the people who
We've talked about it so
clutch
much.
their pearls about this.
Of course you can lie.
The thing, remember, you have someone who's coming in. They don't know what you know. You are in a really strong position. I will tell you, the number of times, and Alice has been there, when we're talking to people and they say things along the lines of course, y'all been listening to all my phone calls, so you know what we talked about. As if we
and I say yeah.
They're like, oh, yeah,
and I say yeah.
So what exactly?
Like,
what did you say?
I do.
I just want to make sure we're on the same page, and they'll just tell you everything, right? I mean, like,
It's so true.
this notion that we should have to tell them the truth is crazy. Like, do you guys want to solve crimes or not? Like,
I literally had a witness, or a target who came in to talk to us and was like, "Well, you've read my diaries," and I was like, You have diaries? Can I see them?
Yeah, like it's amazing. I mean, it's just incredible what people will tell you because they don't know what you know, and you're able to use that as sort of leverage point. So he talks about that, can exaggerate evidence, all of that stuff. I mean, it's just typical law
Can I say
enforcement
something
stuff.
here really quick? Because obviously this made like a bunch of people online were like, oh my gosh, he lied. The investigator lied. Okay, you can call it a lie or you can call interrogation techniques. Here's an example of something that's very similar. We talked all the time about how lie detector tests are not admissible as evidence, right? Because it's not actually telling, you're not going to someone's brain and they're detecting a lie. It is biometrics. And those are not perfect predictors of lies. But if you're breathing heavier, if your blood pressure goes up, if your heart rate goes up, those are typically indicators of being nervous tied with lying. That's why they're not admissible. The fact that you can come in and tell someone they failed a lie detector test, and that's why we know you're lying, so tell us the truth now. That is an interrogation technique, much like quote unquote a lie being told here. So anytime you hear someone online saying something like, I can't believe the investigator lied to trap Richard Allen, it is not, when you define it as a lie, that gets very confusing. But think of it as a lie detector test. It's an interrogation technique to test the bounds of the truthfulness of the person who's testifying before you.
Exactly. Thank you, Alice. Knocked it out of the park, as always. Anyways,
Sorry, this particular line of like going,
it's just
spiraling out of control online is very
It's
frustrating
just silly.
because it's silly. It's pulling at a thread that doesn't exist.
And once again, you don't like that? Change the law. There's nothing wrong with what he did under the current law, right? You don't like that? Fine. You think it's not cool? You want to make it easier on criminals to get away with crimes? Fine. You can change that if you want to, but at this point, he could do all these things. So the first part of the interview wasn't recorded, which is fairly typical because that's the part where you go through the Miranda rights and talk about all of that and all that stuff. Not in custody, he wasn't in custody, so we don't have to do the Miranda rights. But nevertheless, they reminded him of his rights, and he seemed like he was perfectly fine talking. They actually came to pick up the car, which had been seized before. There was no plan in place at the time to arrest him. We're going to see what he says. We talk about guns, we talk about firearms, and Holman does the thing that I just got to tell you guys, as we're always helping y'all get away with crimes. If an investigator ever asks you if you ever let anybody borrow something, the answer is all the time. Basically,
all the time. Just an Uber.
My gun is like the town bicycle. Everybody gets a ride, right? I mean, like, I never know where my gun is. It could be, who knows who has my gun at any time. Because he asked him all the questions. Do you ever let anybody borrow your car? Do you ever let anybody borrow your jacket? Do you ever let anybody borrow your clothes? Do you ever let anybody borrow your gun? Because he's locking him in to the fact that he's the only person who has that gun, has that car, and would wear those clothes. And Richard Allen's like, no, I never let anybody borrow any of that stuff. And that's the whole point of asking the questions.
By the way, this also, I think, it shows this is good investigative work. You are always on the clock. Doesn't matter. People talk when they don't think they're talking, right? So this was very, very good line of questioning. So at this point, Jerry Holman confronts Richard Allen with the fact that the round from the scene is his, from the crime scene is his. And this is when Richard Allen starts growing agitated. He said he only took his gun with him when he was fishing or mushroom hunting, and asked about the, quote, it doesn't matter, it's over, when they went to search his house. Allen said he meant there was a police presence at his house and everyone thought he did it, which is what we said is a possible interpretation. Of course, the fact that his house being searched was connected to the murder was not publicized at this time, so that's a little bit of a stretch, but okay, give him the benefit of the doubt on that. Now, this is the part where the defense says Holman lied, quote unquote, to Richard Allen. So Holman told Richard Allen they had experts who'd studied the video and the audio from Libby's phone and connected him to it. This, of course, wasn't true. And during this now kind of more heated interaction, Richard Allen denies his guilt somewhere between 20 to 25 times. Like, I didn't do it. It's not me. I don't know what you're talking about. But he couldn't explain the bullet and how it got there. And he says certain things that also locks his testimony in. He says that he's never been in the area where the bodies were found. And he'd never been mushroom hunting there, which is when he said he would carry a gun. But he still can't explain the bullet.
And I want to defend Richard Allen here because I live in the country. I don't live in the country right now, but my parents live in the country. We don't go mushroom hunting because that's a good way to die. But we do go walking off in the woods. We got some great woods, it leads to a great river, all this other stuff. My dad, whenever we go, he puts his gun on because you don't know what you're going to run into. And so when you're mushroom hunting, you're going deep into the woods. You don't know if you're going to run into a bobcat or a coyote or whatever, or a human being growing marijuana. I mean, you never know what you're going to run into in the woods. So it's not unusual that you'd put your gun on when you do that. So I don't find this to be an unusual statement about Richard Allen. But what is important is he never had his gun in that area. There's no natural way that, as unlucky as it would be, that his bullet would end up between those girls. At this point, he's getting more and more agitated. You know, they're yelling at each other. They're cursing at each other. Alan's saying, I don't care what you do to me. I'm not going to tell you something I didn't do, which, like I said, it's so interesting that in an interrogation setting, he's not saying incriminating things. It's only when he's not there, when he is. It's getting heated. They're raising their voices. They're using profanity, which Holman talks about is you're supposed to do that in interrogation. You never let the person you're interrogating get the edge on you. You never
match them.
Exactly. You're not the weak, shrinking violet. If they're yelling, you're yelling. If they're using profanity, you're using profanity. He says he was on the bridge. He says he was wearing the clothes that Bridge Guy was wearing. You know, he's basically saying, I am the guy. I am Bridge Guy, but I'm not the murderer. He's not saying that. You know, he never says, I am Bridge Guy. He doesn't say that. But he comes as close to saying that as you could possibly come. At some point, they take a break. Kathy Allen, his wife, comes in, and she's worried about all this. She's like, what's going on? And Allen tells her, all you have to do is ask for a lawyer, and they will let you go. Don't worry about me, which once again confirms he absolutely knew his rights. He knew the situation, but he's going to keep talking to them.
And that's really interesting. He tells her she can get a lawyer, but he doesn't say, I want a lawyer. Which we have other witnesses who say that he was Mirandized before the video turned on. And this kind of confirms that he knew his rights and was certainly Mirandized. But he chooses to keep talking. I don't know. He thinks he can talk his way out of it. We also see this a lot with intelligent targets. Doctors, pharmacists. They keep talking because they think they are smarter than you and they can talk their way out of it. So this is completely consistent with my experience of prosecuting white-collar crimes.
Yes. The people who will not talk to you are the gangbangers on the street who know the game. Like, when they get arrested, the first thing they do is ask for a lawyer. They're like, I'm not talking to you. Alice is 100% right. You bring in a lawyer, a doctor, an ordinary person, someone with no criminal history, they talk. They never ask for a lawyer. They can't help themselves because they think they're going to talk their way out of it. It's just true. It's amazing to see it. I mean, and that seems to be what's happening here. One thing that's interesting, and this is going to factor into my theory, which I'm going to discuss. We're almost done. Alan says he normally carries his gun with one bullet in the chamber. So he's hot. He's ready to go. All he's got to do is pull the trigger. Holman says, your wife and I don't think you're a bad person. And Alan says, would a good person kill two girls? Now, this is not a great thing to say in this scenario, but once again, could go either way. Maybe he's trying to say, well, since you think I'm a good person, I must not have done this. Obviously, the interpretation the prosecution wants you to think is, oh, you don't think I'm a bad guy? Well, I killed two people. Would somebody who killed two people, would you say they're not a bad guy? I mean, is that what he's saying? I don't know. Once again, to me, these sort of slips of the tongue, they could go either way. Not the thing that I'm building the case on.
Again, put it in the bucket of all the crap that he says that is not great for him. But again, this is also a guy that we understand has confessed unequivocally more than 60 times. That's what I would build my case on. Less so these, this probably goes along with kind of the mind games / being able to talk himself out of things. Okay, we're nearing the end, guys. At the end of the interview, Holman says, I think you did this. And Alan says, then arrest me if you think I did it. So they did. this is really important. This was not a trap. When he came to pick up his car, there wasn't some gotcha movement where, okay, he comes in, we're going to swarm him, we're going to ask these questions, then we're going to arrest him. Holman actually says that he steps out of the room and discusses the evidence they've now gathered from the conversation they've had with Richard Allen and said, like, do we have probable cause to arrest him? And they decide they do. And I think they absolutely do have probable cause to arrest him. But this goes along with what I just said about my white collar criminals, like thinking they're smarter than me. The fact that Richard Allen says, then arrest me, like as a bluff. They call him on his bluff and say, well, we weren't thinking about it before, but since you say that, okay, we're going to arrest you. So on cross-examination, Baldwin is the one who does the cross-examination, and he hits Holman as being just an angry bully. You're cussing at him. You're just a mean guy, Holman. And he's saying that Richard Allen is withstanding this assault. Holman said that the death penalty was on the table, but that didn't shake Allen. And the defense kind of goes on about all the reasons that Allen can't be guilty because he didn't try to sell his Ford. He didn't get rid of the clothes that he apparently was wearing that day. He didn't get rid of the gun that apparently the prosecution is trying to say ties him to the murder scene. And asked if he thought Richard Allen was the only person involved in the murder, Holman answers, yes, it's what I believe now. He said previously he kept an open mind that it could have involved more than one person, but after all of this investigation, he thinks that if anyone else was involved in this double murder, they would have flipped. So if you have someone going away to jail for dozens of years for child pornography, for example, they may want to seek a lighter sentence by flipping on them, by offering information, for example. That this has been so publicized, it's been in the news, there's been an arrest made. You can see that someone says, okay, good, we'll have him, Richard Allen, take all of the downfall for this. I'll give you information for this. But no one has come forward. The video doesn't indicate someone else. There's no other forensic evidence that someone else is involved. So he says, now after having investigated, I think it was just one person without a doubt. And remember that hair that was found on Abby? I think it came out in the first week of trial. Baldwin asked Holman, why wasn't this hair tested? And Holman explains that the initial test determined that the hair was both female and familial. And because of that, there was no reason to test, as no female family members were suspects in anything but the fever dreams of the dumbest portion of the internet. Okay, that last part he didn't say, but I'm saying it. Remember, these investigations have so much evidence. There's so much to do. They are literally filtering through tips 5 years later. That's how big the mountain of evidence is that they're trying to work through. You don't test everything. You don't follow leads that you think will lead nowhere. So the fact that they know this is a female family member and there are no female family member suspects, there's no need to pursue that lead because more likely than not, they're young children, right? Abby spent the night at Libby's the night before. It would not be surprising to find a family member's hair on one of their clothes because they live together, wash their clothes together, ride in the same cars together. So this was, I think, another way to try and show that it was sloppy police work, but I thought the response by Holman made a lot of sense why you wouldn't test that hair. Because even if it came back to one of the female family members, I don't think that would be a lead necessarily. They already know who all the female family members are. Now, Holman admitted that there were mistakes made in the investigation. I thought that was also very human because no investigation is perfect. Because you acknowledge head on what you did. And he also was asked if it was possible a different person sit down the hill other than Bridge Guy. Holman said there's no evidence whatsoever of that. And asked if he could rule out the theory that the girls were taken away and brought back, he said definitively, yeah, I can rule that theory out. And I think we can all rule that out based on the cell phone not moving, dying on its own, never being turned off, and all the other evidence that's come out in week 2 of the Delphi trial.
I can tell how much you guys are interested in this case, the fact that we have 140 people still here.
People are still here 2 hours later.
I do want to say, so this is the end of the second week. a lot happened this week, and trials move like this. I mean, it builds up quickly. Obviously, this was a good week for the prosecution. I mean, they really laid out a lot of evidence that explains why they thought it was Richard Allen. The next week, and I'll say this, I thought this was so powerful. I thought this week was really powerful. I think the press doesn't see it yet because they're looking for the confessions because they're sexy. We're going to see those next week, and you guys are going to hear some things that you didn't know before. And you're going to hear some things that Richard Allen said that there's no way Richard Allen could have known unless he was the killer. And I am interested to see how people react to some of that. But I do want to say, as we're talking about this case right now, I already have a theory of exactly what happened here, and I want to lay it out for you very quickly. So there are some things that I think we can say for certain. One, obviously, there was a bullet found between the girls. The other thing we know for certain is that Richard Allen said he always carried his weapon with a bullet chambered. The other thing we know is that in a keepsake box with pictures of his mother and other various personal items was a single unspent round, 40 caliber round, the same type of round that was found between the girls. How do you explain that? What is going on there? Well, remember, what do you hear when you have guys down the hill? What happens in between those statements? A metal sound, which most people say sounds like the racking of a bullet. It seems pretty clear that Richard Allen, or Bridge Guy, Richard Allen, his intimidation tactic was the racking of a bullet. Guys, rack the bullet like in a movie down the hill. But what happens if you're walking around with a chambered round when you rack a bullet? It ejects a cartridge. So let's say you walk up on the girls and you say, guys, rack the bullet down the hill and a cartridge gets ejected. What might you do? Reach down, pick up the cartridge, put it in your pocket. Can't put it back in the gun because that's not how guns work. Unless you take the magazine out, you can't reload the bullet. Put it in your pocket. You then go down the hill, then something happens. You're interrupted, which we know the prosecution says is what happened. We'll see if we see evidence of that next week. And you need to use your intimidation tactic again, but this time you're doing it in a chaotic situation. You use your intimidation tactic. Maybe, for instance, Abby's running. She's in the river. She's getting wet from the waist up, but you've got Libby and you got the gun and you say, stop, and you rack the gun. Because that's intimidating. And the bullet comes out, but you don't really think about it because you're focused on what's happening. The bullet comes down, you step on it, you push it down into the ground, then everything else happens. You murder the girls, you leave, you go home, and you reach into your pocket, and what do you find? You find the unspent round that was ejected when you racked the gun when you first saw the girls. That might be the kind of thing, if you were a murderer, you'd keep. It might be the kind of thing that you would say is a keepsake. And so you take that single round, which is important to you because it happened, that round was ejected during a really critical moment in your life, and you put it in the keepsake box with a picture of your mom and various other things that you care about, and you never get rid of it, so you can always remember what you did. That's what I think happened here. And that's why I think that round was in that box.
Yep. No, I think that's exactly right in terms of why he kept that bullet. I have a lot more thoughts on what I think happened in terms of the 30 minutes or so. I think this was a very fast murder. But this week was incredible in terms of the words of the witnesses who all, remember, they all unequivocally said, whatever I said back then, the picture I now see from Libby's phone of Bridge Guy, that's who I saw. And none of them said Richard Allen is Bridge Guy, but we wouldn't expect that to be the case because he was trying to cover himself up to be unidentifiable at the time. And none of them knew Richard Allen separately from anyone else. They're all strangers. So you wouldn't expect them to be able to point him out. That's not surprising to me. It's Richard Allen's own words who say, I am Bridge Guy. So that's what we saw this week. All of these witnesses seeing Abby and Libby, seeing Bridge Guy at the right times, and all the times match up from these different witnesses, including Richard Allen's own words. Then you have Richard Allen's own words saying, I am who all these people have unequivocally said is Bridge Guy. But I didn't murder the girls. What's about to come, I think, is going to be a lot of the confessions. And this stuff we kind of knew about. We didn't know the specifics of everything, but nothing has been wildly surprising. I think a lot of this came out in the search warrant affidavit and what's been released in past press conferences. We're beginning to understand, kind of the holes of how this fit together. But I do think you're right that next week there's going to be information we don't yet know. But already there has been a difficult road for the defense to hew that says Richard Allen is not Bridge Guy and Richard Allen is not the murderer.
The only thing I'll say, I don't know what's in the confessions. I'm not privy to that, but I know what the prosecution said. They have said there are going to be things that only the murderer would know. And if in a week, when we do our recap on the next week, they haven't been able to follow up on that, I'll be very critical of them. But I expect what you're going to hear in the next week is going to be damning for Richard Allen.
Yeah. And I want to remind you guys, you don't need a motive to prove murder. But I kind of suspect we will find out what the motive is. And obviously, I think it's sexually motivated, whether there was actual sexual assault or not. And I also think that all the people on that trail that day who have testified could have easily been the victim. And for whatever reason, those 3 girls, maybe 2 was the right number, 3 was too many, maybe they were older, maybe the girl who said he looked at me glaringly, the fact that she looked in his eyes and he was like too close for comfort. Betsy Blair, she was all by herself, but maybe she looked more fit. Maybe she'd seen, because he has been to the Monon High Bridge, maybe he knows who Betsy Blair is, was like, don't feel like killing someone to know. Maybe the girl who was driving along the side of the road saw him, and if she had stopped, he's like, darn it, she's seen me bloody. She's got to go too. I think all of these people were just inches away from their own deaths. And we will find out more about, basically how he chose Abby and Libby. But I think it was horribly, horribly fateful. And so much could have changed this. One of the 3 girls maybe stayed a little later. If they were 10 minutes late, 10 minutes early, I think they'd still be with us today. This is a devastating case in so many ways, and we'll end with the same reminder that we had last time. The family and the loved ones of Abby and Libby are having to live through their hell again every single day of trial. And remember that. These are real people whose real lives are affected every single day. You're seeing it with the witnesses. These people who don't want to be part of this case. They have not shown ulterior motives. They really don't want to be part of this double murder case. But the law has required them to be here to testify. Keep that in mind when you consume, media about this case or you post about this case. Just remember, we are talking about real people's lives that will continue past this trial. This is not for sport. This is not for game. And we hope that this trial continues on the same. I think it's been progressing very well in the sense that both sides are arguing as they should as attorneys in the courtroom. Let's hope that continues this next week, and we will try to bring you another recap next week, considering that I won't be in the hospital. And if I am, you'll just hear beeping in the background.
Exactly.
Okay, well, we've kept you guys here for 2 hours. Thank you for sticking with us. Thank you to all of the people in the courtroom who are reporting. Murder Sheet, go listen to them. They are putting out daily podcast episodes after each of the court days. There are people on Twitter who are who have press passes, who are sitting there and reporting very well. So, don't just take our word for it. We are also having to consume this from what's being reported. But thank you for being here. Ask us your questions. There's going to be a lot more coming this week, and we look forward to bringing it to you. But until next time, I'm Alice.
And I'm Brett.
And this is the Prosecutor's Legal Briefs.